Old Magic. Chapter 1. My friend Najin is what you might call a shaman. Or a medicine man, if you want to use the white man's vernacular. He's one of those special kind of people that has the old magic, ancient secrets passed down from one generation to the next. Course, it's gotten so watered down in the passing that the true magic is gone soft. Again, blame the white man's vernacular. Old Whitey came over on their boats and carved out a new nation on this great American continent, and damn be the people who lived here already. They killed off a lot of the original magic, and turned their marketing folks loose on the rest of it, making it a joke or making it imagination. Folks like the men who came before Najin were turned into habitual drug users spouting off about hallucinations and worse, taking advantage of their tribe so they wouldn't have to do the real work. Can't say I blame the first people for losing faith though. It's tough for one magic man to stand up to a hail of bullets from a Henry or Winchester or the Gatling gun when that was finally hauled out west and turned loose on them. Magic don't stand a chance when everyone who believed it in was bleeding out on the earth, and the few who thought they could believe were rounded up and herded into reservations. Hell, I don't believe most of the time, and I'm half magic myself. What the heck's a half-wizard, folks ask? Well, it's like half-assed or halfway done. One of my parents was magic, and the other wasn't. The genetic lottery that mixed together and made my helix decided half of me was magic. Made me sensitive to it, maybe even gave me just a little bit of flavor of it, but make no mistakes about it. I'd have a long way to look up to even be rated as a talent. Been reminded of it my whole life. Of course, living next to the res and policing the borders of it to keep white folks out and red, and it only served to remind me of just how little magic I had. You there, Sheriff? I fumbled for the old CB radio and watched it slip out of my fingers and bounce across the dirt-covered mats to the old Bronco I was driving. I reached across the seat and stretched out for the black cracked plastic housing, and was smart enough to lift my foot off the gas while I did it. Not smart enough to stay in my lane though. I caught the cord with the edge of my fingernail and fished it over to grab the microphone. I held it up in triumph. Huzzah! I shouted as I sat back up. My cheer was drowned out by the wail of a dog-nosed Peterbilt barreling down the road straight toward my grill. It was a game of chicken I couldn't win. I hauled the wheel to one side and sent up prayers and a magic spell of protection at the same time. The big rig driver had the same idea, minus the magic. He cranked his wheel one way and stood up on the brakes. They started squealing, sending up tendrils of black smoke and rubber as I yanked on the steering wheel harder and turned my lumbering old Bronc into a slide. He clipped the tail end and ripped off the heavy iron bumper, keeping it in his wheel well as a souvenir. Force equals mass times acceleration. Physics at its finest. The back end of the Bronc decided with the help of the big rig that it needed to be in front of where I was sitting. It was like sitting a horse in the rodeo. Except it kept spinning and decided to spill over sideways so it could travel a couple hundred yards out in the plain scrub grass next to the two-lane blacktop. I rode it hard, one foot pressed to the gas pedal, mashing that little sucker all the way to the floor as we spit up dust and rock and dirt. The engine roared like an animal in agony, the wheels churning at air as we came to a stop. I was jammed up at the top of the cab of the Bronco, held up by one leg against the gas pedal that pressed me back into the seat so hard, I was probably leaving a permanent indentation. "Sheriff, come in?" I heard Lucy's voice through the cloud of dust that crawled in through the open window and settled all over everything. The spell, weak as it was, maybe kept me alive. Or maybe it was just sheer dumb luck, though I had a fair share of that too. I eased off the gas after a moment and fell to the far side passenger door on the ground. Kept the microphone though. "Sheriff," I groaned as the engine sputtered twice and died. "What's your 20? Lucy was a plain vanilla human, a battle axe with a beehive that didn't need something like magic to keep the rest of the world in line. She did it through fear and discipline and a glare strong enough to peel paint off a wall. Plus a mean right hook from a 10-year career as a professional roller derby champion." "Out by the highway," I answered back. It sounded a lot less groany this time as I arranged myself into something resembling sitting up. The passenger window was shattered under me, and I could feel the rough rocky ground under my jeans. Something was poking me in the posterior and I dug it out, careful in case it was lodged in skin. The side mirror flashed sunlight in my hand. "You need to get over to the Bar T," said Lucy. The Bar T was a big cattle ranch that served as a big game hunting ground half the time. It bordered 36 miles of wilderness on the res, and sometimes visiting folks had a hell of a time figuring out that the three strands of barbed wire setup meant keep out. I shoved myself up as the adrenaline started to wear off, and felt the aches and pains of being in a wreck start to flare up across my body. Magic or no, there was a price to pay for getting slammed around at 50 miles per hour. Some hunter step across the border, I grinned at the microphone. The first people on the res could get a little ornery with trespassers, but 99 times out of 100, it was just a prank I had to deal with. Got a dead body, Sheriff. I stared at the microphone. Did you hear me? Lucy shouted. I heard you, I answered, probably raising my voice a little more than I needed to. A head peeked into the driver's window above my face. You alive in there? The big rig driver asked. Don't get sharp with me, Ben Logan. Lucy used my full name. I was gonna pay for my rudeness later. I'm on my way, I told her and looked around for my Stetson. It had become unlodged in my cross-seat sideways travel and rested between the gear shift and the steering column. Had Bo meet me out there. He's already on his way, she snapped back. Yeah, that payback was gonna be a bitch. Sheriff out, I clicked the radio back to the little metal holder on the side of the unit and settled my hat on my head. I'm alive, I boosted myself out of the window and dropped to the ground. The truck driver was nice enough to ignore the grunts and noise and doofs my body made doing it. You got a chain in that thing? I asked him as I dusted off rocks and glass and debris. Let's get this thing upright and don't tell anyone about this little mishap. Agreed?